Okay, welcome to our very first episode of Ties Training, Talking with My Dad. That's the title I came up with. I'm Tyler Andrews, and I'm so excited to be joined by my co-host and father, Tim Andrews, for what I hope is going to be a unique journey together as I prepare for Project Himalaya. A quick primer in case you managed to find this without knowing too much about me. I'm Ty. I'm a professional mountain athlete for La Sportiva and the head coach and founder of Chowski Endurance Collective. I spent the first decade or so of my athletic career really as a runner, just normal run-of-the-mill runner, track, roads, marathons, all that good stuff. And eventually I found that I really loved competing in the mountains, specifically really big, high-altitude mountains. And that kind of narrowed my niche down into this world of big mountain speed records, trail running, and ultra marathoning. But I do still love a good 5K, still a big fan of the sport, and am very involved in that as well. So I'm not going to give a super long intro on me right now because I want to introduce my co-host here, but if you do want any more background on me, you can check out my bio on my personal site, which is tylercandrews.com. So now, Mr. C, I'm going to introduce you to the world as that. That's kind of our family nickname. And I don't think I can get through a whole podcast without calling you that. So Mr. C, welcome. I am very glad you're here and you decided to take me up on this offer and this project.
I'm thrilled to be here, Tyler, and excited to see where this goes.
All right. Well, since my audience is probably less familiar with you, why don't you go ahead and give us a bit of a run through of your background, so that people can get to know you a little bit, kind of your work, life, all that good stuff.
Okay, so I'm a tech person mostly and a consultant by trade. So I've done a lot of things, startups, big companies, and consulting on all sorts of system projects and strategy projects through a long career, which I'm semi-retired from right now. So I'm doing a little work in consulting here and there. So that's the work arc. And then I've always been like to be outside and athletic. My older brother was sort of almost a coach to me and really got me into sports at a very young age. Every sport you can imagine, football, baseball, although I was always terrible at baseball. But every sport you can imagine. And my father was a big time runner actually, and my older brother was actually a world-class sprinter. And I was an okay runner here and there and liked running. But I really enjoyed tennis, and my father was a big golfer and dragged us around the golf course a lot as a youngster. And again, my older brother was a scratch golfer for much of his life. So golf and tennis ended up being my big sports.
Gotcha. I remember one of my earliest memories actually is because like I wouldn't consider you a big runner, but I do have this memory of you having this like yellow headset thing that must have been like an early radio synced like Walkman or something and going out for runs in our neighborhood when I was like a little kid. So like what is your background with like the kind of endurance side of sport and running and that stuff?
Yep. Yeah, it was literally a very, very early, I think it was actually a radio, maybe even. I can't remember, but it
Yeah,
was
that sounds
pretty
right.
early. Yeah. Um, and you know, I've always run and enjoyed running. I've never been a runner by self-identification or anything like that. I just like it. And my knees, just prevent me from doing any significant running now. But for a lot of my life, I would run, but it was always casual running. I did run cross country in high school. Um, so that was about the only really organized running I ever did. And when I got to college, I did athletic things, again, squash and tennis and things like that, but I didn't really do any more organized running at that point. But I would always run just around the neighborhoods like you were talking about. So that's pretty
Yeah.
much where I've been. I've never been a big endurance racer. I think maybe the longest race I've ever run is 5 or 10 miles, maybe something like that.
Yeah, no, I remember we did a 5 miler in some year on Thanksgiving down in DC. I remember.
Yes, we
Uh,
did. The Gaithersburg Turkey Trot.
wow, you got a good memory. No, it's great. And I will say, I part of the reason I wore this shirt, do you recognize this shirt when we're talking about father-son stuff?
That shirt?
Yeah, the shirt.
Is that my shirt or my
No,
father's
it's
shirt?
it's your father's shirt. This is my grandfather's shirt. Your dad's shirt. So kind of carrying it down through the generation. So yeah, like you said, my grandfather Link Andrews was a very very good runner, is my understanding. Back in the day, like when he was kind of in college. Many many moons ago. But yeah,
He
I
didn't
kind
go
of.
to college, but yes,
Oh,
in high
sorry, college
school,
age.
no, no, yeah, yeah, high school, college age. He went to that big race in New York, which I can't remember the name of. Okay, Ty. So this new format for your training blog is your project. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in it and what you'd like it to be about?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, I see this. There's really two different things here. One is a written training log, which I've been keeping since I was like 17 years old. And I've kind of shared it on and off over the years. And for what it's worth, I do post on Strava, which, Mr. C, if you don't know Strava, it's like the kind of running social media app. But it doesn't really have space for kind of long form writing, which is what I tend to do in my log. So I will be sharing all of that. That is all on my Substack, which is also a brand new thing for me. So all of this is very new for all of us, which is exciting. So there will be a written side on Substack, which will essentially be a walkthrough of my week from my perspective. And it'll be made a little bit more palatable. So it's not super, super dry and just my own thoughts. But the idea is to have that be much more technical and open to, kind of the people who are really interested in the behind the scenes of training at a high level for an event like this. So that's the written side. And again, that's on Substack or on my website. And then this kind of the audio video portion, the idea is to make it a little bit more, what is the word? Approachable, maybe, so that someone like my mother could consume this content and kind of get a sense of how things are going, what's going on, some funny stories, and also hopefully learn a little bit about the sport, about training, about what I'm up to, but without kind of diving into all of the weeds about every single thing. So the idea is this should be a little bit more conversational, a little bit more fun, and then if you really want to delve into the weeds, I would recommend checking out the written version.
Great. And I'll say two things. I've been writing in Substack for a little over a year. It's a great platform. And not that I have any biases, but Tyler, you're a terrific writer. So
Oh,
I would
thank
encourage
you.
everybody to take a look at that Substack and subscribe because
Thank you.
uh, it's enjoyable and you're just very good at getting your thoughts on the page.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. And I will also say, hopefully, my goal is to share also some kind of just general essays and race recaps, things that are a little bit, again, more maybe more interesting to someone who's not just in there for the nuts and bolts. So yeah, if you want to subscribe, check it out. You can kind of tune into what you're interested in and tune out what you don't.
Okay. So why put this out there and where do I fit in?
Yeah, good question. So I was sharing my log a long time ago. I want to say it was like from maybe 2015-ish until around the beginning of COVID. And I honestly don't even really remember why I stopped. I think it was if I had to guess, it was probably that I had like an injury or a season that like wasn't going well. And so I just like got too self-conscious and so I shut it down. Um, but the idea to bring it back, I've always really appreciated other people who share their journey, their training insight. There's I talk about this in the written version of this kind of launch post where there's this guy named Nate Jenkins, and shout out to Nate if you're still running and coaching and stuff. Nate was an elite runner in New England when I was getting into the sport, like when I was in high school and college. And way back, this is like right when Facebook was brand new and stuff, like 2006 or something. And he had like a blogger, or I don't know what platform it was, but he literally would just post his training log every single week. And I kind of copied that. Like it was that format to me was extremely compelling. Like I was always a nerd and obsessed with the nuts and bolts of training. So to be able to see this guy, he was top 10 at the US Olympic trials. He was really, really good runner. And to be able to see every single day exactly what he's doing, his workouts, his splits, his mileage, all these things, to me, that was fascinating as someone who is getting into the sport. And it also kind of gave you this look into him as a person. And I met him a few times. He's a great guy. But like I felt like I kind of got to know him just by reading his log every week for years, and seeing his mood shift and when things were going well and when things weren't. So that was kind of my inspiration and my goal for creating this project was to basically just do that for people. Like, hopefully, I don't think there are a ton of people. There are a lot of people that share on Strava, but I don't think there are a lot of people that are kind of sharing, you know, more of the qualitative stuff, or excuse me. Yeah, qualitative, the qualitative stuff about training. Strava is very good at quantitative. Strava shows you how far you ran, how fast you ran, whatever. But I think it's much more interesting to see, okay, like how did this workout feel? Was it hard? Was it easy? That kind of thing. As well as just like what's going through your head, like especially for someone who's at a high level. I think that's really interesting to see what other people are doing. And then my goal would be, yeah, that I can, there's some 16-year-old out there who maybe is going to read this and be like, wow, that's really cool. Like I would love to go do something like that and, be a little bit of an inspiration, hopefully. It seems very cliche to say
Yeah.
that, but I think that's fair.
No,
Um,
I think that makes a lot of sense. And we're both musicians, and it reminds me about music has similar kind of phenomenon. It's really interesting to see a really great guitar player or piano player, and how do they practice? What do they
yeah.
do? How do they learn songs? And it's a little nerdy, but if you're into it, it's really helpful to say, oh, this is a really great expert at this, and this is how they go about it, and having those insights, and especially if they're talking along with it and saying this is why, is really helpful instead of just seeing, okay, here's another scale to practice, or in your case, okay, here's my time and
Yeah.
here's how far I went. So that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you want to say something else?
Yeah. Yeah. So then the other question that you asked, which I want to address, is why am I doing this with you, with my father? Um, I was thinking about how, you know, I guess full transparency, I'll be transparent with our audience here. Like I tried to do this by myself and it didn't work. Like the audio version of bringing the training logs on paper onto, an audio video thing that just did not work. And I realized, okay, what I need is someone to make this into a conversation. Like that's what's going to make this more interesting. And I chose you because, well, for a lot of reasons. First, I think you're incredibly smart and you're someone that I look up to and I trust. And I am curious to hear your takes about all of this stuff. And I also think that it's an interesting juxtaposition because obviously you're very involved in my life, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of things about what I do that is still opaque and not clear to you on like a day-to-day level. And it's like that's what I think about all the time, right? So for me it's like there's almost this disconnect of it's this thing that's so important to me that I feel like sometimes we can talk about, but it's also, you know, we like literally don't even have the vocabulary sometimes to talk about what I'm doing. And so I feel like that creates this space for us to develop like an interesting rapport that is unique, I think, like in the both to me and you, and also in the kind of like podcast space in general, which, I don't know how plugged into that world you are, but there are so many just like bro podcasts of like dudes talking to their dude friends about running or football or
Yep.
whatever it is. And it's like the world does not need another one of those. So like
Yep.
that was a big part of it too. But
Yeah.
yeah, I am excited selfishly to just have a cool project to work on together. And I think that it's something that bringing you in as part of the journey and like getting you more plugged into that world, to me, that's something that's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, for me too. So thank you, and thank you for making me part of it. And we'll see where it goes. And I think it is interesting because, as you said, I know a lot about your life at one level, but this part, yeah, there's a lot I don't understand, and I'm interested. I'm always curious about these things, and hopefully, I can represent the part of your audience that is not quite as nerdy and sophisticated about running as you are, and ask the silly
Yeah.
questions that everybody's got on their mind, and get some good information out there for people. Great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about what this is and isn't. So you wrote in your intro podcast just that. And so let's talk first about what this isn't.
Yeah. Um, this is sometimes how I like to lay things out, is like thinking about, okay, what am I trying to do, or what am I not? So let's start with what we're not trying to accomplish here. So I'd say the first thing is anything with my training logs is not coaching advice. And actually, this is a conversation I feel like you and I have had a bunch of times, which is this misconception that high level athletes become really great coaches like automatically, which I think is a big misconception. I think that
Oh yeah.
it's actually the opposite a lot of the time, that high level athletes don't make great coaches because they assume that what got them to where they are will work for other people. And that's not a good assumption, is my understanding. Like what I do in training is not applicable to other people. Like I do coach athletes. I founded a whole company based on coaching. And I mean, if you look at what I do versus what I give my athletes, they're super, super different. Like I've spent 20 years figuring out what works really well for me. And I think that one of the reasons that I'm not terrible at what I do is because I've found the weird things that I am good at. I think any really high level athlete, you're going to have some kind of like freakish ability. And it's like, okay, figure out what that is, and then you cater to that. So like for me, I know I'm really good at dealing with altitude. I'm really good at handling high training volume. Those are things that for a lot of people are deal breakers. So those are things where I really lean into them. But if I had an athlete who I was coaching, I would never do that. So first thing, this is not instructional. I think there will hopefully be things that you can take away as a listener, or reader or watcher, but don't like just take what I do it, like go try and do it. That seems like a really bad idea. So that's number one. Number two is this is not going to be perfectly polished, both in the written format or the AV format. We want this to feel raw, conversational, friendly. I sometimes rate my training log like with my thumbs in the back of a taxi. Like that's just like when I do it sometimes, like right when I'm coming back from the mountain or something. So it's not, we're not trying to be David Foster Wallace. We're not trying to be Ira Glass here. Um, so please excuse
And just for the
if
for the normal folks like me, David Foster Wallace is an uh, eccentric but well-known author in some cultish circles, and
sure.
Ira Glass is a famous PBS. Is it not PBS?
No, WB, the NPR,
What do you
excuse
call
me.
it? NPR
NPR. Yeah.
host of a show.
This American Life. Yeah.
Right,
This American
This
Life
American Life.
basically invented podcasting.
Right.
TLDR. That's a whole other story. But anyways, yeah, we're not
Yeah.
trying to be This American Life. It's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Not yet.
not, not ever. Um, okay. And then the third thing is I'm not really trying to get any particular point across. Like this doesn't have, there's no agenda here. We're not trying to convince anyone of anything. All I really want to do is share in my journey with other people. And like I said, hopefully like be that Nate Jenkins figure for, some younger runners out there. I think that would be super cool, and, hopefully engage with some people. So yeah, that's what we're not trying to do.
Yeah. And I think that's great. And I think I will give you a lot of credit because your whole time as a runner, you've always thought about giving back to the community a lot. I remember when you founded Chosky, you talked about that being an important part of the idea of the Chosky Endurance Collective. And I think it's great, and I'm proud to see you continuing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So now that we've talked about the what it isn't, let's talk about what it is then.
Yeah. So what is this? So this is my, again, this is on the training log side. You will have my almost completely raw and transparent thoughts. There are a few small exceptions, some personal details and things like that, where I will kind of anonymize people and locations, just kind of normal disclaimer stuff. But in general, I will be posting what I write to myself and what, I've literally got thousands of pages of this from over the years, and this is going to be that. We will be adding some little things, making some tables prettier and easier to read, some summaries, stuff like that. But in general, it's going to be raw, it's going to be open, it's going to be transparent. The other thing is that for better or for worse, my training logs are very much a glimpse inside my head, which maybe is slightly terrifying. I can see you laughing at that. But
Yikes.
a lot of the time, and I said this about Nate Jenkins too, is you can kind of see like how things are going, just even little linguistic things about how people, uh, or I guess I'll use the first person, like how I would talk about certain things, sometimes if I'm feeling tired or I'm kind of like trying to, bump myself up a little bit, I'll be like, oh, like this run went really great, even though it was really hot and I was really tired. It's like, I'm kind of qualifying it that way. And then sometimes it's just like, I can just read, from 6 months ago and be like, oh, wow, like I can tell just by how stoked I was in my writing that like training was going really, really well. So it's kind of like I think you kind of start to pick up on little things like that and you get to a sense of the person's mood and kind of how things are going, which is pretty exciting. Um, and then the third thing that this is um, it will be a combination, like I said at the beginning, of some very technical stuff as well as hopefully a kind of general story arc of this buildup. And if this is successful, then I would hope we can try and continue it and do this for a long time to come. But the idea is, super technical on the written side, as well as more conversational here on the audio video side. And even in the written version, though, there are a lot of just kind of like random little life events and short story, like not short stories, but just little anecdotes that I'll throw in there, especially like you'll see in the first few posts where I was kind of still on vacation and coming back into training. And there was like more going on in my life than literally just going to the same mountain and running the same trails every day. So I would write some kind of just, oh, like today we did this, it was fun and exciting and blah, 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 even if it's not relevant to training. So there is, hopefully a little bit of color commentary in there as well.
Great. Yeah. And I think again, it's one of the things that uh, you don't entirely wear your heart on your sleeve, but pretty close, I would say. But it's endearing, at least to me, um, and I think that's one of the reasons you have a lot of followers is you put it out there, and you know, yeah, obviously you're going to shade it maybe a little bit, as you said, to give yourself some more motivation. But my experience is you don't shade it that much. Um,
Yeah,
so
I think it's pretty raw. And I think again, because most of this, like for 20 years, it's been for my own benefit. It's for me to look back on is most of why I keep the log. And I don't plan
uh,
to change that. Like I'm not writing to an audience now versus then. I've always just kind of been writing towards myself. Um, and so, yeah, I'm very blunt with myself. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I felt really disappointed today because I felt like I did a really bad job or let something go or whatever. Or like, hey, I was super stoked about this and it was incredible. So I think that emotional side, there's not a lot of filter or anything there. And there will be cursing. So I apologize for that in advance.
that
I'm
is
not, I'm
true.
not censoring that. This is
It's
2025.
yeah, it's whatever the appropriate rating is. It's an adult
Yeah.
read.
It's at least that's
Um,
PG-13.
okay. Okay, we'll let it slip in.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk. It's funny because having been your father now for this entire arc and seeing you work at this, the thing that's most amazing to me is how disciplined you are, in fact, because, m my wife and I would joke that, well, basically, eat, sleep, run, eat, sleep, run, eat, sleep, run. Uh, so how do given how much effort is involved and how much time it takes up, how do you do all this planning and get organized around this stuff?
Yeah, I think that for me, the discipline and the planning are very interconnected. I think that when I have something that I'm working towards and I put a plan together and I feel very confident in the plan, then it's very easy for me to stick to the plan on the day-to-day basis. So if I have a big goal like this Project Himalaya, which is, what is it, 4 months from now? Yeah, 4 months from now. Um, it's I can map out, that entire buildup and then say, okay, I know that even if I'm really tired today in January, going out and doing the training that I wrote, like way back when, if I do this, then I'm going to be able to do tomorrow's training, and then I'm going to be able to do next week's training, and then I'm going to be able to do next month's training, and then I'm going to be able to accomplish the goal that I set for myself. So, there's all these silly cliched analogies about stacking bricks and building the foundation and brick by brick and one step at a time and all these different ways you can look at it. I do like the brick by brick kind of analogy where, there isn't one specific day that matters other than, the day of your competition or performance. It's all about stacking those bricks so that, you have a big construction. And every single one of them matters, right? And so that's where, for me, I come in on a day-to-day basis is if I have that stuff laid out and I know this is what I'm supposed to do, and everything that I map out training wise is cumulative. So like next week is built on this week, then I know, okay, I can't just skip a day because I'm lazy or tired, right? It's like, I know that if I want to do this stuff next week, I better do what I wrote this week, or else next week it's going to get pushed off, right? And then it's going to get kicked down the road. So I guess to talk on a more specific level, where we are now starting this buildup, it's, early January at this point. The way that I set this up is I always start with where am I going? Where do I want to be? So I generally look at seasons. I would call a season. And this goes all the way back to, high school and college where you would have actual seasons of cross country or track. And you say, okay, I want to peak at the end of the season. I have one really big thing that I want to be ready for. And then you work backwards. So for me, okay, I know I want to be ready for Project Himalaya in mid-May. And I guess I'll put a little caveat in here, which is like, I know I keep teasing this because uh, I'm not allowed to talk about what that is. It's a very exciting project. It's a big mountain project. It's in the Himalaya. That's as much as I'm allowed to say about it right now. But that's where we're going, and then we're working backwards from that. So I know, okay, here's where I want to be in 4.5 months, and working backwards, I can say, okay, I'm going to start basically from zero because I've taken a couple weeks off for, kind of reset between seasons. And then I can look at splitting that into different blocks is kind of like the next level of architecture. So we have, if you think of it like um, different layers, you essentially have the season layer, which is the biggest. And then under that, you have blocks, which are about 3 weeks. And then in blocks, you have weeks, like single 7-day period. And then you have your one training day. So I generally don't write out every single training day of the season. I think that's too just things change too much. And I do this. This is the same when I'm coaching athletes. I would never write out 4 months of daily training for someone. It's just crazy. But I will write out the basic flow of those blocks and even some weeks, kind of like general volumes and stuff like that. And then I'll write out maybe the first 2 to 3 weeks on like a daily basis. So that's kind of where I start, and that's pretty much where I am now.
Okay. So you start with this big goal, whatever the goal at the end of the season of training is. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have to define pretty precisely what's required to get to that goal. And then you
Yep.
try and work backwards from there to set it up so that on a given day in January, which is a long ways away from the big goal,
Yep.
you can say, okay, I have to do 50 minutes of this or 10 minutes of that or whatever. And you can focus entirely just on that day without getting caught up in the grander picture. That's the idea.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's it can be helpful to know how a day is going to prepare you for stuff down the road, but I also think it's a pitfall to be thinking too far ahead because that can be really overwhelming, right? So if you look
Yep.
at a workout 3 months from now, it could be, oh my gosh, that looks way too hard. I'm never going to be able to do that. But if you're just looking at the first 7 to 14 days, okay, all of this stuff is manageable. That's how I try to think about it. And just having the faith of like having done this now many, many times that, okay, if I just keep doing this and I keep, inching up, and I'm consistent, then that workout 3 months, I don't have to worry about it now because I know that it'll take care of itself. Like I will be ready for that when the time comes.
Uh-huh. And how did you come up with this approach? Is this a common approach amongst people like yourself, or is this something you sort of came up with over time?
I think it's pretty standard in endurance sport in general, whether you're talking about running, cycling, mountaineering, that you generally start with the big goal and then look at where you are now, and then you kind of try to fill in the space in between. Um, I do know there are coaches in the running world, at least, who are on both sides of that spectrum. So, Grant Fisher, who is one of the best US 10,000 meter runners, he got a bronze medal at the Olympics. Um, I know he and his coach will literally map out every single workout for an entire buildup for like 6 months or something, which to me that's like a little much because I think just trying to plan like what workout am I going to do 5 months from now is really hard to do because everything is so cumulative and it's like a butterfly effect kind of thing where if something changes a little bit at the beginning, it can totally change where you are 4 or 5 months from now.
Yep. Yep.
So I don't love that approach, but then I also know people. I'm trying to remember which. There's another group. Who was it? Oh, it's a Harvard team. Harvard has gotten like really good at cross country, and their coach literally wouldn't tell them what their workout was until they were done with their warm up that day. So they would like, he'd be like, all right, go warm up. And then they'd come back and then he'd tell them what the workout was. And like, I would go crazy if that were the case. That would not work for me.
Yep.
I'm like thinking
Yep.
about it for a week, So like, that would not work for me. But it's like, there are people on all sides of that spectrum. I think I'm kind of somewhere in the middle where like I like to talk about an architecture of a buildup. So I'll think about kind of very broad strokes, whether it's with me or with an athlete of, okay, here's the basic timing of my big blocks. Here are some really like, here are some kind of key workouts that I want to try and hit. Or like for me, it might be FKTs or something, or time trials or races that are before the main goal. But I'm not going to write out every single thing. I'm going to fill in those gaps as I get closer to them.
Yep. And since we have long form audio here, maybe we'll cut this out so you'll know if it stays in.
Sure.
The butterfly effect is a reference to a famous saying from long ago when complexity science was invented that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, there can be a tornado in Texas. And the idea is that a very, very small effect somewhere leads to a very, very large effect down the road. So that's the point you were
Right.
trying to make, I think, about your training is it's pretty hard to plan your exact workout 6 months from now because minor differences in your training in the early days can make bigger differences down the road in what you're able to accomplish. Is that what you're trying to get across?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's
Mhm.
almost always things are almost always going to go better or worse than you predict. They're almost never going to go exactly the way that you predict.
Right,
So
right.
it's like almost silly to try and plan for that because you're just going to end up adjusting it anyways. So I think it's fine to have kind of placeholders and then maybe you dial them in a little bit. So I have a giant spreadsheet and I'll write like medium workout, hard workout, light workout, like something like that. Or again, if there are really specific things like I would love to do the Cotopaxi FKT here in Quito or in Ecuador. So it's like, okay, that could fit in pretty well maybe right before I leave Ecuador and go to Nepal. So I might pencil that in as like try and do that sometime this week. And I need to be in shape to do that. But yeah, the every single day is the thing where it's too hard to plan that stuff because life happens.
Yeah. So you have so it is very much like almost any complex project that if anybody's ever done a complex project, whatever it might be, you have to decompose it because it is literally too complicated to think about the
Yeah,
whole thing at once. And again, you want to be able to focus on, well, what do I need to be able to get done today, this week, next week? That's very close in that I can see, okay, if I don't
exactly.
get this done, then I'm going to start being behind in everything else. Um,
Yep.
I'm sure most people can relate. A lot of people, even if you're trying to get on a diet or something, it's the same kind of problem, right? If you're any kind of thing like that, physically, or, I'm in systems development. Systems are the same way. If you have a big system, you start out, well, I need this system to work like this at the end of the day, but that's not where I start. So yeah,
Yep.
okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And then yes, day to day, close in, you know what you're doing, but day to day, far out, you just know if you're not meeting certain important milestones, you're in trouble. And then you have to try and figure out how to alter your path or make adjustments. Is it worth going into that now, or do you want to wait until we talk more about your training logs in terms of how you might adjust, if you get a month in, 2 months in, some amount of the way in, and things are going either better or because you said they're always going to go better or worse, right?
Right.
So so
Generally.
so I don't know how deep a dive we want to go into right now, but do you want to talk a little bit about how you think about that?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk a little bit. I mean, I think in general, I try um to give myself a range in everything I do. And the reason for that is so that I can make some adjustments literally on the fly, like in the day during the workout, as or even on at the beginning of the week while I'm mapping out that week or something. So there's always going to be a little bit of flexibility there. Uh, the bigger changes, like let's say you're dealing with an injury or fitness is super great and it's everything is really clicking, that's where it's really kind of, I would say it's just a case by case thing of looking at the situation and figuring out, okay, maybe I'm in a different place than I expected to be a month ago, but here I am. This is my reality. And now I still have the same goal. And sometimes it means completely scrapping everything that you've done. Last summer is actually a good example of that. So I was here in Quito, um, prepping for UTMB Ecuador, and I got a little glute injury. I basically couldn't run downhill. It was a big problem training for a race that has a lot of vert. And I really had to scrap a lot of things. I'd
And
scrapped
vert is
yeah.
what it vertical, right? Up
Vert,
and
yeah,
down.
sorry. Yes. Good interruption. So vert, when I use the word vert, I'm talking about vertical gain. So in general, if I say something has a lot of vert or some amount of vert, 1,000 meters of vert, it means it goes up 1,000 meters. Whereas it's not factoring in up and down. In this case, it's actually relevant because we're talking about up and down, but in general, vert is just short for vertical gain. Yeah, it's a good point.
Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
Anyway, so yeah, I was training for UTMB keto. I get a little glute strain. I can't run downhill. And so I really have to like scrap everything I'd written for like 3 or 4 weeks and just figure out, okay, I need to be on the bike some more and let this heal. I'm going to do a lot more uphill training, like on the treadmill and the Stairmaster, where I can just go uphill. And I'm actually super lucky because here in Quito, we have the Teleferico, which is a cable car. So I can run uphill and then take the cable car down. So even that, I found little ways
That's
to do
handy.
that. It is. So there's times where you just have to scrap it. I actually remember from high school I had a my US history teacher had this brutal expression that she used in writing, which when she was talking about editing these long papers, she would say, you have to just be able to kill your babies, like just like let
Yeah.
go of it,
Yep.
like don't be too
Yep.
attached to it. And I think that's really true with
Yep.
training plans too. Is I've fallen into that trap where I've got this race on my calendar, I've got this hard workout, and I have to do it. And sometimes the right thing is to completely scrap it and just start over and listen to your body and adjust. So yeah, as much as training can seem very methodical and spreadsheet driven and all these things, especially for me, there's still a huge element of um, adjustment and going with the flow and being okay just letting go of things. I think that's a good place to stop for this intro episode. Again, this episode will be pretty different, I think, than the next
Yep.
many episodes because I think this is really just introducing the topic, introducing you and me. After this, I think we'll be talking much more about what I'm actually doing in training that week. But this is a good place, I think, to end this, and then we'll go into our bonus segment, which this week we're going to talk a little bit about my Achilles surgery because that was something that involved both of us. So stick around for that, and we'll also probably have that as a separate video. So, welcome back, everybody. We are now going to introduce our little bonus segment. So, the idea here, obviously, this is our first episode, but in general, the first part of the episode, we'll be talking through my training for that week, and then we'll have our bonus section. We'll call it the cool down, where we'll talk about something outside of just my training that's maybe kind of background context, or it could be explaining an idea or questions from you guys, whatever that's going to be. Mr. C, do you want to introduce our first bonus section here?
Sure. So we're going to talk about your surgery on your Achilles tendon, which was a big issue for you, I remember for a long time that you were struggling and you were in, I think, a fair amount of pain. You were pretty close to the vest about how bad it was. I think for us as well as for the rest of your community. Um, and so you weren't sharing entirely, I think, how much it was frustrating you, but it snuck out once in a while, especially after races that didn't go so well. And you're like, some of those curse words came up that we were referring to earlier about how difficult it was. And, you know, your struggles. And then I remember it getting more serious in terms of your thinking about, well, gosh, should I do something about it? But it was a complicated thing and took a long time to recover, as I recall. When did it sort of become uh, get to the point where you got really serious about it, do you think? And do you remember an exact moment when you said, okay, I just got to deal with this, or was it more
Oh yeah.
gradual?
No, well, it was both gradual and there was a moment. So the very first time that I remember having a problem with my left Achilles was actually after the Doha 50K World Championships, which is 2016. So that's
That was a long time ago.
like
Yeah.
almost 9 years ago, 8 years ago now. And at the time I attributed it because that race ran on like a whole bunch of cobblestones. And I was like, oh, it's got to be the cobblestones is like irritating the Achilles and whatever. That race went really well. But I remember it started to bug me then. And it was very much a boiling the frog kind of injury in that it just kind of crept up and up and up. And at first it was,
Okay, so we have to
here.
have a quick interrupt
Do
then.
you need to
So
explain
the
what boiling the
boiling the
frog
frog
means?
metaphor, which you might have even learned from me because I've been talking about that one forever, is something I learned a long time ago from my dear friend and inspiration, Alan Kay, which talks about the fact that, and actually somebody told me it wasn't true, so I can't swear
Oh no.
biologically and ecologically whether this
I
is
don't even
true
want
or
to know
not.
that. I
But
want to
the
assume it's true.
metaphor is worthwhile and great, which is if you take a frog and you throw it in a pot of boiling water, it will get out as fast as it can. And it's hot. You touch the hot stove, you jump back. But if you take a frog and you put it in a pot of just very comfortable water and you slowly and gradually turn up the heat, you will parboil the frog and it will die very happily, but it will die because it will never get out of the water because it thinks it's comfortable up until the moment it's dead. So that's the story of the boiling the frog, which is, you can get complacent and comfortable in a situation that doesn't seem too bad and doesn't seem too bad and doesn't seem too bad. And then it
Yeah.
reaches a crisis point and it's too late to do much about it.
Yep. That pretty much describes it. I want to know who came up with like who was boiling frogs that figured this out? Like came up with the expression.
I
Like
don't know where the original came from, but it became a very common executive business story
yeah.
because, firms, companies do this. They get very complacent and they called it the parboiled
Yeah.
frog problem.
Anyway, so it was a boiling the frog injury, and it just kept getting worse. Like, we're talking like season after season, year after year, not like week after week. And there would be some times where I felt like it was no problem, and sometimes where it would be like pretty crippling, from a running perspective. Again, we're talking about a time when I was mostly running marathons and I was running a lot. And so, for a normal person, it might not have been an issue. Long story short, eventually, I figured out what it was. It was a Haglund's deformity, which is a bone spur in your heel, which explains the gradual onset and the kind of getting worse by worse and worse because it's basically if you picture your heel, is here and your Achilles tendon wraps around here. It's jabbing out into your Achilles tendon, which feels really bad.
Ouch.
Yeah,
So it's like
it's
a
not
little
comfortable.
thumbtack or a spike
Exactly.
jutting out into
Yeah.
your
Into
tendon.
your, like on the inside of your Achilles tendon. And it creates all this inflammation and scar tissue and yada, yada. And it's a fairly common issue with runners. A lot of people in the general population, I think, don't even realize they have this because if you're not running 150 miles a week, it's probably never going to become an issue. But if you are, then suddenly it presents itself and it's hindering you from doing that. So I knew other
Yep.
runners who had had this, and the prognosis is usually not great because it's not going to go away. So you can do a lot of things to combat it. So for many years, I tried everything in the book. I tried, strengthening, PT, gosh, like shockwave therapy, all these different things, which to some extent would often make it a little bit better for some amount of time, but again, you're dealing with the symptom, not the cause, right? So it's never really going to fix it. And the real question is, okay, can I get through my entire competitive career without getting surgery? That is the question that athletes struggle with this question. So for me, it got to the point, and I do remember extremely clearly. It was here in Quito, and so this would have been the late in the year of 2023. So I had just come off a really good season in the Himalaya, actually, but it was almost all hiking and climbing. It wasn't much running,
Right. I remember you saying it was
and
fine. Yep.
yeah,
Hmm.
and that stuff didn't seem to bother it. But then I had gotten roped into trying to do this. I think it was 100K, like a road race, like a flat 100K or something. And I started doing a lot more running training. And within like 2 weeks, it was like, oh man, this is really not feeling good again. And I remember one like very, very like it was yesterday in the park right here in the Carolina down the hill. And I was trying to do like mile repeats or something. And I got like one rep in, like 3.5 minutes in, and it was just like unbearably painful. And I just like laid down on the grass and was like, fuck, this is like it's just not working. It's just getting worse. And it was way too like I couldn't even do one rep out of 10 or something for the workout. So it was like, okay, I gotta deal with this. And yeah, that was the moment where I like had a little pity party and felt very sorry for myself. And then it just completely transitioned into like, okay, let's do this. Let's get it done as quickly as possible.
Uh-huh. And so how did you end up finding a surgeon and figuring out, because you came up with a different procedure, as I recall. You knew some people who had this problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And this is one of the interesting things was part of the reason I didn't get it for a long time was because in the running world, there were all these people who had gotten Haglund surgery, and it's a pretty tough surgery. It was, it's basically taking a power sander to your calcaneus bone and sanding it down is
What's
what
your
they're doing.
calcaneus? That's the bone
That's your
behind your
heel.
Achilles tendon.
That's your heel bone. Yeah. And like Galen Rupp is an example of a guy who, was the best of his generation in the United States who got this procedure. And, it was 12 to 18 months before he was performing at the top level again. And this was maybe 5 or 8 years
Wow.
ago. Yeah. So
Hmm.
it was a long surgery and, or excuse me, a long comeback from the surgery. So that made me very hesitant to ever get it. But I literally just started Googling and reading on letsrun.com, which is, one of the most popular running forums. And a couple people were talking about, oh, there's this new procedure. Some people got this. And there is a woman I know who's a professional runner. I don't know her personally, but we had like a very close 1 degree, who'd gotten this surgery
One
on
degree.
like 1 degree of separation, like friend of a
Oh,
friend.
okay. Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and she had gotten this surgery on both heels because she had it in both heels.
Oh,
And I want to say it was during COVID, and I want to say she like got it in January, and then at like July she ran in the Olympic trials or something. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. That's such an insane timeline. So I reached out to her. She put me in touch with her surgeon. And then things moved extremely quickly at that point. It's this new procedure. It's called 10X, TENEX. There's not a ton of doctors that practice it, but it's way less invasive. The tools they use are really tiny. It's basically laparoscopic surgery. You're in and out in like half an hour. And the recovery is supposed to be way faster because they do a lot less damage when they get in and are working on the tendon. And
uh-huh.
so she connected me with her surgeon, Dr. Nasser, at the Arizona Pain Treatment Center in Phoenix. And I called him on the phone. I was like, "Hey man, I'm a pro athlete. I'm trying to get this as soon as possible." He's like, "I'll see you next week or something." It was so fast. I don't remember the exact dates, but
I remember that because you
it
were
was like
debating
within a week
whether
or
you could
two.
fit it in and whether you wanted to
Yeah.
do it then. And yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it was like within a week or two, like you and I were in Arizona. Um,
Yep.
from like the first, from like literally from that workout of like lying in the grass crying in the Carolina to like being on the surgeon's table was like, I'm pretty sure it was less than 2 weeks, which is crazy. And I will say,
It is crazy.
I could do a whole series on how frustrated the US medical system is, but I ended up paying out of pocket for this. I potentially could have gotten this um, through my insurance, but I wouldn't have been able to pick the surgeon that I wanted to work with. Obviously, he's in Arizona. My residence is in Massachusetts. And it was going to take months. And for me, it was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it right now, like as quickly as possible and waste no time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so that was it. And then
Yeah.
it
We
was
could have a
like,
whole series of podcasts just on the US healthcare system, but
let's
that's
not do
another
that.
story.
Let's cut
Yeah.
that right now. But yeah, that was it. It was like we had a phone call. I got an MRI here in Quito like the next day to send to their office. He's like, "Yep, you're a candidate. Looks great. Like come in whenever it was, like December 14th." I was like, "Okay, let's do it." And I got on a plane and then I met you in Phoenix.
Yep. Yep. I remember it. There's some things, of course, that are so, traumatic is the wrong word, but maybe traumatic isn't the wrong word at one level, that you just remember every speck of detail. Because, yeah, I remember, uh, going to that. It looked, I mean, it was also just an amazing thing because it's like, wow, they're operating on him in this little strip mall.
Yeah, I know, right? That part was really
You're
funny.
so used to going to a hospital, and it's like, this looks like, where you could get your nails done or something.
Yep. They're doing Achilles surgery on
But
pro athletes in there.
and the whole thing was done in a day and a half. I think we got there and it was literally like you went to
Yeah.
see him and then it was like the next day, right?
Next
They
day.
did the
Yep.
surgery.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yes. And then of course there was that fateful night because, I remember I'll never forget that. So, I'm pacing outside the nice thing was being in Arizona in December, so you could actually pace outside the little strip
Right.
mall, and
The
while
only
you were
nice
get
time to be in Phoenix.
yeah, while you could get your surgery done, and I'm talking to your mother and just trying to keep calm and waiting for the surgery to finish. And he was a terrific guy for the few minutes
Yeah.
that I talked to him at the end. And then we had to uh, take you away. And, it's like you were like the last one of the day or something. So it's like 5 o'clock or something. And we're going
Hmm.
back, and he gave us the script with the pain meds. And we get to the local drugstore to get the pain med script fills. And guy looks at it, he says, "Yeah, we're not going to have any of this for 6 months." I'm like, oh, that's not good. And we're trying to get in touch with the doctor's office, but of course they're closed and we're having trouble getting anybody. And you were still under the influence of
They
the
gave me fentanyl. I
anesthesia,
was under fentanyl.
whatever it was.
That's a
You
hell of a
were
drug,
like,
let me
this is
tell
not
you.
going to be a problem.
I was like,
I
well,
was like, well, I'm
that's
not so sure, but we couldn't get anything. And so we said, okay, well, somebody was supposed to call us back, and we figured we could go to a hospital emergency room or something if we had to. I was figuring, well, I'm making all these backup plans in my mind. But you were feeling well, and so we went
yeah.
back to the little place we had where we were staying, and you propped up your leg and did everything they told you to do and nodded off to sleep. And I was doing a little work, and then I went to sleep. And then the next thing I know, you were like, I don't remember exactly how I woke up, whether you were literally screaming in pain or you just
No, I think I
called
made
me.
it. I think I made it till the next morning. I think it was when I had to get out of bed in the morning to go to the bathroom, and I realized I could not.
Well,
I
maybe it
couldn't
was
put
it was
any
very
weight on my
early in the
foot.
morning. It was still
Yeah.
dark outside, and you
Yep.
were in a lot of pain. And
Yep.
you can't really tell on this podcast, but I'm short, like 5'3", and you're like 5'9". So you're not big, but you're bigger than I am. And I'm trying to carry you into the bathroom because you literally couldn't walk. It was quite,
Yep.
it seems funny in hindsight, but at the
It's
time,
funny in hindsight.
it's really
Yep.
scary. And
Yep.
you were in a lot of pain. And, but we made it through it. We got some pain meds later that morning. We finally got the doctors to call us back, and from there it's kind of a blur because we literally, again, I think it was literally the next day after that, we got on a plane and flew back to
Flew
Boston.
back to Massachusetts. Yeah.
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 Hmm.
Yeah.
Was that how you remember it? Well, I mean, you were in the middle of it,
Yeah.
so you.
No,
Mhm.
I think you did a good job. I mean, I think for me that yeah, the crazy thing was going from being in surgery to out, and then I literally my strongest recollection was I I felt nothing. I was like, I don't even know if they did anything. I woke up and I had a walking boot on. That's the only difference. I was like, I don't even know if they opened me up at all. Like they could have just put this boot on. Like the juxtaposition from going from uh I feel nothing. Like I don't even know if they did surgery on me to how much pain I was in within like 6 or 12 hours was unbelievable. It was like the most extreme uh spectrum of sensations I've ever experienced. And I was just like, oh my God, I've made a tremendous mistake. Like they've done something horrible to me. And then like finally getting on whatever it was, Vicodin or Percocet or something for a couple of days, just being like, okay, whew, okay, I'm going to be able to get through this. But it was rough. I remember, yeah, that whole weekend or week and getting back through the airport and back to Concord, just like, whew, yeah, it was a rough trip.
Yeah, it was a tough trip back to Concord, but we made it in the boot in the airport and everything. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, it was amazing. At one level, you were in a lot of pain. And any of us who've been through surgery, I've had a couple of arthroscopic surgeries, which are minor surgeries, but they
yeah,
still hurt a lot.
for
And
sure.
you're hobbling around, and you were certainly like that. But the other side of it is, wow, they did all this surgery and you're just in a walking boot and on an airplane
Yeah.
within 48 hours.
Yep. It's pretty
It's just
cool.
amazing.
Yep.
Yep. And then you were hobbling around our house for a couple of weeks and then you went right back to keto, maybe what, 2 or 3 weeks was it? It's pretty quick.
I think it was even
Um,
just like a week I was back down
Maybe a
here.
week. Was it
Yeah.
that quick?
Yeah. It was pretty
And
quick.
then you were tapering off the drugs already and already getting out of your boot. Do you remember getting out of the boot and what it was like to really start
Oh yeah.
walking?
Yeah, so I was really surprised by how quick everything went. I mean, that going from that amount of pain to then I remember being in your house and using a cane to walk around. So like I still was
Right.
in the boot, but I couldn't put all my weight on it. And then I remember by the time I flew down to keto, maybe a week later, I was off the cane. So then I was just putting weight on the boot and walking like normal. And then very quickly, within like 2 weeks, I had a follow up with Dr. Nasser, and he had me take the boot off and do some really basic, just like tiny little motions to kind of see how that felt. And then um, within I want to say 4 weeks after surgery, I was walking on it without the boot in very small doses. Like the way he wanted me to do it was I would do like, an hour of just kind of like standing and walking around the house and then put the boot back on. Um,
Yeah.
and the other part of this that we haven't even talked about, which I think is part of why it went so well, is because he told me literally the day after surgery, I guess it was it the day after? It might have been like 36 hours after. So I think the day after surgery, I was pretty messed up. But then that next morning, I was on the stationary bike in my boot. And you were like
I
there to
remember.
supervise me.
I remember going to that
He was
little
like,
exercise room in the place
yeah,
we were staying.
in
Yeah.
our little Airbnb gym. And he was like, okay, start at 10 minutes on the exercise bike, like no resistance, and then you can add 10 minutes a day. And I'm like, okay, well, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And if you look at my graph, it's like literally linear. It's like every single day I added 10 minutes because that's who
I
I am.
remember that. Yeah.
But I
And
think
then you
that's one of
got
the
a little
things.
bike out in the backyard in Quito and you were
Yeah.
riding on that.
And I think that's
A
one of the things
stationary
that
bike.
both kept me sane as well as made the transition back so much easier was for better or for worse, I was an extremely dedicated patient to my rehab. And so I remember, yeah, I followed that 10-minute rule until I was doing 3 hours a day on the bike after, 18 days. Um, and then I was like 3 hours seems like enough. So I, I held it there, but I was also doing at that point, probably 10 to 15 hours a week of PT rehab on that ankle. Because the thing I remember was when I took the boot off, even after 2 weeks, how much my calf muscle had atrophied. It looked like two different people's legs. It was crazy how
Hmm.
much muscle mass I had lost.
Wow.
So uh, that was tough, but it was also it gave me something to do. And I had big goals in the mountains that year that I was stoked about. So again, going back to the beginning of this episode of when we're talking about working backwards, I was like, okay, I know that I really want to do this stuff later in the year. And I'm going to do everything I can every single day to get ready for that, even if it means like sitting on the bike for 3 hours, which is
Yeah.
so ridiculous.
So two things. Shout out to Dr. Nasser. Yay,
Yeah. Shout
Dr.
out Dr.
Nasser.
Nasser.
Unbelievable.
Oh, man.
And to everybody who goes through anything that requires PT, pay
Yeah.
attention to that PT.
Shout out to our PTs for sure. Yep.
And do it. Don't skip
Yep.
the exercises. Don't skip the PT. So,
Yep.
so when did you start running? Do you remember?
Running, I remember for sure I was doing some running when Connor got here, and that would have been by like the middle of February. So we're talking like 2 months after surgery, I was already running.
Wow.
And I mean, like jogging like 5 minutes at a time, maybe on the treadmill or something or on the grass, but
Yeah.
still 2 months, 2 months after Achilles surgery, and I was already jogging. And then from there, the transition again, that was the part that surprised me the most. I thought that it was going to be a lot harder to get back to where I had been, fitness wise and performance wise. But what I found was that I had managed to get like super, super fit on the bike. My cardiovascular system felt incredible. And I think if I'd tried to go run like an all out 5K or even a marathon or something like that, where it's really running specific and, your economy of motion, your kind of mechanical efficiency is really important. That would have been a lot harder. But the stuff that I
Uh-huh.
was doing that spring was mostly big mountain stuff, which is really slow, where mechanics is less important. And it's more about how big is your engine. And I did really, really well. Like in March, I set my first couple of FKTs and stuff when we were down in Chile. And
Yeah.
I felt at
So
that point,
that's
I was like,
amazing. So
whoa,
in March, which is, 2.5 months after surgery,
yeah,
you were already taking a major trip
yep,
and running and doing
yeah.
serious running, right?
Yeah, and it
And
was one of these things where I remember um, two really specific things. One was the Ojos del Salado record, and the other was the Tres Cruces Traverse. And both of those things on the Ojos record, I literally broke my own time. So I was like, oh wow, not only am I back from the surgery really quickly, but I'm actually faster than I was last time I tried to do this before the surgery. That's great. And and the Tres Cruces was the same thing. It was something that I previously had not been able to do. And so those two in combination were the things for me that showed me, okay, this was a really good decision. And I was just amazed that I was already not only back to where I was, but maybe even a little bit better than I'd been before,
wow. And do you feel like you were 100% by then already, or did you not
No,
know? Or
no, definitely. I mean, maybe at the time I thought so, but like in retrospect now, looking back, I see little things where even in the gym I can see, oh, I still had weakness on that left side where I got the surgery. Even looking at photos, I can see my muscle mass is still smaller. That stuff takes a long time to come back. So at the time, I was super stoked and I was like, awesome, I'm recovered. This is great. But in retrospect, and that's a good thing, was actually had way more to go in terms of improvement, which is great.
nice, yeah. And certainly from there, as your father, uh, it was quite something because you had a couple of, let's be fair and transparent, pretty tough years where
Yeah.
your races generally weren't going great, and you were still doing some incredible things here and there on the mountains, especially, but it was hit or miss, and the races especially just weren't going well.
Yeah.
And then, 2024 was kind of uh, home run derby. Seemed like every time we talked to you, something better happened, and it was really a great year. Do you think that's how much of that do you think is related to the fact that you fixed this Achilles problem?
Oh, I think almost all of it. Yeah. I think that what I didn't realize was how much it was impacting my ability to train. So it wasn't just that it was impacting my racing itself on race day,
Uh-huh.
but it was
Yep.
limiting what I could do in training up to that point. So,
Yep. So just what we were talking about before with the buildup, you weren't able to do the
yep,
buildup, so the goals got
yep,
compromised. Ah,
yep.
interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think that even like we talked about a little bit before my last summer, I had that little glute injury. I still had one of the best buildups and then best races of like the last 5 or 6 years, probably off of, my first real buildup back since surgery.
Uh-huh.
And that to me, that was just a sign of, oh yeah, this is 100% the right decision. And then my season in the Himalaya last fall of 2024 was just unbelievable to me. Like I was so stoked with that. And so I think, yeah, in retrospect now, I absolutely like if I had known how fast the recovery was going to be and how easy the surgery was going to be, I would have done it like 4 years ago. And I think that's part of the reason that I wanted to do this as one of our first episodes is there's not a lot of information on this procedure. And if I hadn't just been scouring the Let's Run message boards and like had personal contacts in the elite running world where I could ask people about their experiences, I wouldn't have even known about this, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say absolutely. It was, 2024 was objectively the best year of my career. And I attribute almost all of that to having gotten surgery. And like I said, I was an incredibly dedicated and good patient. I think that's a huge part of it is you have to take the rehab seriously. But I think if you do that, it can, you can be back really, really quickly from a procedure like this.
Yeah. So in terms of you're giving back to the community, this is an important thing because we can tell people, hey, if you're a runner and you're having Achilles pain,
Yep.
you should get checked for this. It may not be your problem, but if this is your problem, what's the name of
Yep.
it again?
A Haglin's deformity. So you really have to get an MRI, I think. Maybe an X-ray can show it. But any orthopedist will be able to interpret that and tell you if it's there.
Uh-huh.
If you're having heel pain specifically, like where the Achilles attaches to the heel, that's a pretty bad sign for Haglin's. So that's what I would want to check out if I were you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there are, many doctors at this point. It's not like you can just go around to the corner orthopedist and get it, but
Yep.
is a procedure called TENX, TENEX,
Yep.
and you just have to find a doctor who can get it. And hopefully you can get it either covered by insurance or pay for it however you can pay for it.
Yep.
But clearly in your case, it was literally a miracle, just about a miracle. Um,
Yeah.
and I was certainly thrilled because you've been in many ways a different person because obviously all of this uh, difficulty, colors your whole life, right?
Yeah.
This is your life. You're a professional athlete, and when you have an injury that is uh, threatening your career, it's a dark cloud, a sort of Damocles, whatever you want to call it. So the ability to see you have such a terrific year uh, was incredible, and so we hope other people can benefit from your experience scanning the running boards at Let's Run.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Let's run
Anything
message
else?
boards.
Yeah. Anything else that
Never say
we
that again. That's a whole other thing. No, I think that's a good place to leave it. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I feel like now it's finally something where, I feel like I'm firing on all cylinders, and just at the right time, getting ready for, one of the bigger projects that I've ever attempted. So it's super exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seemed like if anything, you're still improving.
Yeah, it
Um,
sure seems like it. It's like season to season. I keep surprising myself. Like even this first couple of workouts here in Quito have gone, better than last year. So, I think there's still room to grow.
Great. Well, we'll try not to jinx it, but we'll
That's
have
right.
our hopes up for 2025.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you guys all for listening. If you have any questions about 10X or anything, please feel free to reach out, or Achilles stuff. And yeah, we'll wrap there. That's all for our first episode. Thank you guys for listening. Please send any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email. It's ty@chosky.run or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. And remember, you can read my training logs, written version, on my blog at tylercandrews.com or get that delivered to your inbox via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Thanks, everybody, and we will talk to you soon. Ciao.